Leora always walked with her head down. It was easier that way when her eyes stayed on the dusty streets. She didn't have to see the way others looked at her. The whispers followed her everywhere, not breeding material. They said too pale, too small, too strange in her people's world. Those words were worse than a curse. It meant she would never be chosen. Never be wanted, never belong. The market was busy that day. Full of voices and the smell of hot food, Leora kept to the edges, slipping between stalls. Her arms full of grain sacks for the baker, her thin frame made it easy to move unseen. That was her way of surviving if no one noticed her, no one could laugh. She was almost to the baker's door when a deep, unfamiliar voice made her pause. It was not the sharp, clipped speech of her people. It was warmer. Heavier, slower. She glanced toward the docking bay and froze. A tall figure stood there, wearing strange armor. The skin of his face was smooth and sun-browned. His hair was short, his jaw square. A human. She had heard of them. Dangerous, curious, unpredictable. They were new to this colony world, here to trade and help repair damaged gates after last month's storm. Her elders said they were too bold, too quick to speak their minds. Leora believed she would never meet one up close. But now, there he was, turning his head, and his eyes landed on her. She froze, her fingers tightening on the grain sacks. Most males looked past her like she was air, but this one didn't. His gaze didn't move away. Instead, he stepped closer. "That's a beautiful color," he said. The words felt like they were meant for someone else. She blinked, unsure. What? Her voice was barely a whisper. He pointed slightly toward her cheek. "Your skin," he said. His voice calm and certain. "It catches the light like silver." Her heart beat faster. No one had ever called her beautiful. Her people compared her to snow, mold, or ash. This human had compared her to silver. She didn't know what to say, so she simply turned and hurried into the bakery. But the words stayed in her mind like a seed planted deep. All day she replayed it. Maybe he was mocking her. Maybe he just said strange things because humans were strange. But when she remembered his eyes, there had been no laughter there, only truth. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the way he had looked at her, like she wasn't a mistake, like she was worth noticing. The next morning, she found herself taking the long route to deliver bread to the council hall. It passed near the docking bay. Her heart pounded when she saw him again. He was working on the damaged gates with a heavy tool. Sparks flying. For a moment, she stood hidden, just watching. He worked with steady hands, his movements full of quiet strength. She didn't understand why she wanted to watch. She only knew it made her feel something she couldn't name. But she wasn't the only one watching. From the shade of a nearby wall, a pair of yellow eyes narrowed. Vorik, the tallest of their young males. He had mocked Leora since they were children. Now his gaze moved between her and the human. His lips curled into a smirk. It was the kind of look that meant trouble. Leora felt her chest tighten. She turned away quickly. If Vorik had seen her looking at the human, he would tell others, and if others knew. She didn't want to imagine it. She hurried through her tasks that day, keeping her head down even more than usual. But as the sun fell low, she heard that voice again. "Hey, Silver." She turned, and there he was, smiling. It wasn't a wide smile, just a small, warm one. "Didn't catch your name yesterday," he said. She hesitated, her people's rules echoing in her head. Talking to outsiders without permission was frowned upon, especially for someone like her. But the words slipped out anyway. "Leora," she said, softly. "Kane," he replied, tapping his chest. "Nice to meet you." It was such a simple exchange, but for Leora, it was like stepping into another world, one where her name mattered, one where her face wasn't something to hide. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a shift, small but real. She didn't know yet that this moment would change everything. The next day began with gray clouds, hanging low over the colony. Leora moved through the market carrying a basket of dried roots for the healer. Her steps were quick, her eyes low, but inside her mind the memory of Kane's smile still lingered like a spark in the dark. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, that the human had only been polite, but a part of her, the part that had been silent for years, refused to let the thought go. She noticed whispers following her again, but they felt different, sharper. Two alien women near the fruit stand stopped talking as she passed, their eyes sliding toward her. Before turning away with faint smirks, Leora's stomach tightened. It was already happening. Someone had spoken about her and the human, and news traveled fast in the colony. She didn't need to guess who started it. Varric's shadow loomed in her mind, tall and mocking. He would not let her be left alone now, not after what he saw. By midday, she was making her way back from the healer's hut when she heard a familiar clang of metal on metal. Her steps slowed. Kane was again at the damaged gates, his jacket tight around his waist, his shirt damp with sweat as he worked. There was something about the way he moved, each strike measured, each motion certain. She found herself standing at the edge of the street, half hidden behind a stack of crates, just watching. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something she didn't have a word for. His head lifted suddenly, his eyes catching hers with a spark of recognition. He didn't look away. Instead, he set his tool aside and walked toward her. "You're not hiding this time," he said with a small smile. Her cheeks warmed and she glanced down. "I wasn't hiding," she said, though it sounded weak even to her own ears. He chuckled softly, a sound that carried no cruelty. "Well, then maybe you're just watching to make sure I don't break anything," he teased. She almost smiled, almost, before she could answer. A low voice spoke from behind her. "What are you doing with him, Leora?" She turned to see Varric standing there, his arms crossed, his eyes narrow. There was a dangerous edge to his tone. Kane's expression shifted slightly, his body straightening. "I was talking to her," Kane said evenly. Varric let out a short, humorless laugh. "Talking with her? You don't know what she is, human?" Kane didn't blink. "I know she's standing here. And I know you're being rude," he said, his voice calm but carrying a quiet weight. People nearby had stopped to watch, the air thick with tension. Varric stepped closer, towering over Kane. "She's defective stock, not worth a second look. And if you were smart, you'd stay away before you make a bigger fool of yourself." Leora felt her chest tighten, shame and anger twisting together. She wanted to tell Varric to stop, to walk away, but her voice was frozen. Kane's gaze never wavered. "Where I come from," he said slowly, "we don't measure people's worth like cattle." The words cut through the air like a blade. Varric's smile vanished, replaced by a hard glare. "You think you can speak to me like that?" Varric said, his voice rising. Kane didn't flinch. "I just did," he replied. The crowd around them murmured, sensing the moment was about to turn. Varric's hand twitched toward the training yard down the street. "Prove your words, then." "Human," he said, his tone laced with challenge. Kane tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing in faint amusement. "All right," he said, "but you might regret asking." Leora's heart pounded. She had seen Varric fight before. He was strong, fast, and brutal. Kane, though broad-shouldered, was an outsider with no knowledge of her people's style. And yet, he followed Varric without hesitation. His calm presence somehow more unsettling than bluster. The crowd followed. Too eager for a spectacle, Leora found herself drawn along, though every step felt like walking into a storm. The training yard was a wide circle of packed dirt surrounded by low stone walls. Varric stepped into the center, rolling his shoulders. Kane removed his gloves, tossing them aside, his hand steady. There was no official call to start. Varric lunged first, aiming a heavy strike. Kane sidestepped with surprising speed, catching Varric's arm and twisting it just enough to unbalance him before stepping back. The crowd gasped. Varric growled and came in again, this time faster. Kane moved like water, avoiding the blow and delivering one sharp, precise strike to Varric's midsection. The alien stumbled, eyes wide. It didn't take long. Varric swung with growing frustration, each miss feeding his anger. Kane's movements stayed clean and efficient until one final shift of weight sent Varric crashing to the ground. Silence fell over the yard. Kane stepped back, breathing evenly, his eyes scanning the crowd briefly before settling on Leora. There was no boast in his expression, no demand for praise, only a simple nod, as if to say, "You're worth standing up." For Varric pushed himself up, his face dark with humiliation. He spat at the ground, but said nothing. The crowd began to disperse, whispers chasing the human's name from mouth to mouth. Leora stood frozen, unsure what she was supposed to feel. No one had ever fought for her before, not like this. And though she didn't fully understand it yet, a shift had begun that no whisper, no insult could undo. Night had fallen over the colony, and the streets were quieter than usual. Leora sat alone on the small stone wall behind her home, her knees drawn to her chest. The sounds of the market had faded hours ago, replaced by the distant hum of the wind through the gates. She could still see Kane's fight in her mind. The way he had moved, the way he had looked at her afterward. It was something no one had ever done, not for her, not for someone who was supposed to be invisible. She told herself she should be grateful, but cautious. Humans were outsiders, and outsiders left eventually. If she let herself believe his words, if she let herself hope, it would hurt even more when he was gone. But the warmth she felt in her chest refused to fade, no matter how hard she tried to push it away. A sudden knock at her door startled her. She climbed down from the wall, moving carefully to avoid being seen by the neighbors. When she opened the door, Kane was standing there, a faint cut on his cheek and a quiet look in his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Probably not," he said, his voice low. "But I thought you should know Varric isn't done." Her stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" she asked. Kane leaned slightly closer, his voice dropping even more. "He's angry, humiliated. And that kind of man doesn't take humiliation quietly. I heard him talking to two others. They're planning something." Leora's hands curled at her sides. "I told you before," she said. "You shouldn't get involved with me. This will only make things worse." Kane shook his head slowly. "Too late for that," he said. "I'm already involved." For a moment, they just stood there, the night air cold between them. Leora didn't know what to say, but her silence was broken by the sound of footsteps in the street. Kane's eyes flicked toward the sound, sharp and alert. 3 shadows moved between the buildings, slow and deliberate. "They're here," he said under his breath. He stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her without thinking. The figures came into the faint light. Varric and 2 other males she recognized from the market. "Well, well," Varric said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look who's playing guard dog for the defective." Kane didn't move. "If you've got a problem, you can speak to me directly," he said. One of the other males laughed harshly. "Oh, we will," he said. "And maybe we'll teach your little pet here to keep her head down." Leora's breath caught in her throat. Kane stepped forward, his tone calm but carrying an edge like a blade. "Try it, and you'll regret it," he said. The street went silent, the cold wind the only sound for a moment. Then Varric smirked, tilting his head. "You think you're some kind of hero, human? But heroes bleed the same as anyone else." He lunged without warning. Kane met him halfway, the impact loud in the still night. The other 2 moved in as well, and the fight became a blur of movement. Cain's fists and feet moved with precision. Each strike meant to end a threat quickly. But 3 against 1 was no small thing. A blow caught his side. Another grazed his jaw. Still, he didn't back away. His body a wall between Leora and them. Leora could barely breathe. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, but her feet stayed rooted. She saw Cain's eyes focused, unshaken. Even as he took another hit, something inside her shifted then. Something that had been locked away for years. She grabbed a loose wooden pole from beside the wall. When one of the attackers stepped toward her, she swung it hard. The crack of impact, sharp in the night. The alien stumbled back with a hiss of pain, clutching his shoulder. Cain glanced at her for the briefest moment, surprise flickering in his eyes before he turned back to the fight. A final sharp elbow to Varric's jaw sent him sprawling into the dirt. The other 2 pulled him up, muttering curses. "This isn't over," Varric spat. Holding his jaw as they backed away into the shadows, Cain didn't answer, only stood there breathing heavily until the street was empty again. Leora still held the pole in her hands, her grip tight, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You didn't have to," she began. But he cut her off. "Yes, I did," he said simply. There was no triumph in his voice. No need for thanks, just certainty. She looked at him then, really looked. He was bruised, bleeding, and tired. Yet he had stood his ground without hesitation. "You're going to get yourself hurt because of me," she said, her voice quieter now. "Maybe," Cain replied, "but you're worth it." Her throat tightened at the words. No one had ever said that to her, not once in her life, in that moment. She knew whether it was dangerous or not. She couldn't go back to being invisible, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. The morning light spilled cold and gray across the colony's stone streets. Leora moved carefully toward the water pumps, her steps slower than usual. The night's fight left a tight knot of fear in her chest. She hoped the danger was gone, but the weight of eyes watching her made it hard to breathe. Cain was already there waiting, his face calm but his eyes sharp like a hawk's. He looked at her without shame, without doubt, and for the first time. She didn't look away. They sat near the quiet splash of water, the sound soft between them. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "They say I am worthless, not good enough to be part of our future, Cain's." Gaze didn't falter. "Where I come from, no one decides a person's value by their skin or size," he said. Leora wanted to believe him. But years of pain made the words hard to hold. "I was told to hide, to be silent, to not dream." She said, "Dreams are for those brave enough to fight for them." Cain answered. Her heart skipped. "What if I'm too weak to fight?" He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "No one is born strong," he said softly, "but sometimes someone's kindness can give you power you never knew." She looked down at his hand, then back into his steady eyes for a moment. The world around them faded. She forgot the rules, the laws, the whispered warnings. But the quiet was broken by a sudden noise, a soft shuffle near the alley. Both tensed, eyes darting. Leora pulled back slightly, fear flashing in her gaze. From the shadows stepped a figure she knew well, an elder from the council. His face was hard, his eyes cold and sharp. "You're speaking with a human," he said in a low voice. "This is forbidden." Cain stood, hands raised in peace. "I mean no disrespect," he said. "Only truth and friendship." The elder's lips curled in a bitter smile. "Your kind do not belong here," he said, "and she belongs to our people, not to outsiders." Leora felt the old fear rise again, crushing and heavy. The elder turned his gaze to her. "Will you listen to the laws of your people, or throw away your honor?" Cain looked at her, waiting. She swallowed hard. Torn between the hope Cain gave her and the weight of her heritage. "I don't know what I am yet," she said quietly, "but I want to be more than what they say." The elder's eyes narrowed. "You will answer before the council tomorrow." He said, "Prepare yourself with that." He disappeared into the morning mist. Leaving a silence that felt like a storm waiting to break, Cain reached for her hand again, his touch steady and warm. "We face this together," he said simply. Leora nodded, feeling something new strength, not from her own, but from someone willing to stand by her side. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. Asterisk. The morning sun burned weakly through the thick fog as Leora was dragged toward the council hall. Her feet barely touched the cold stone steps. Whispers swirled around her like biting winds. Hush! Voices full of scorn and curiosity. The colonies? Elders gathered inside, their faces stern and unforgiving. The chamber smelled of old metal and faded power. Leora's heart pounded against her ribs like a warning drum. The head elder, a tall figure cloaked in dark robes, stared down at her with cold eyes. "You have brought shame upon your people by consorting with a human," he declared loudly. His words echoed off the walls. Heavy and final, Leora's throat tightened. But she lifted her chin. "I only spoke with him," she said quietly. He said kind words. Laughter rippled from the back of the hall. Cruel and sharp, one elder sneered. "Kindness is weakness, and weakness will lead you to ruin." Cain burst into the chamber, his armor scratched and dirtied from recent fights. The room fell silent in shock. He walked straight to the center, voice steady. "You call kindness weakness. I call it strength." The elder's eyes narrowed. Some rising in anger, the head elder slammed his fist on the table. "You are an outsider. You have no right to interfere." Cain met his gaze without flinching. "I have the right to defend what is right," he said. He turned to Leora and said, "I will not let anyone harm her for being different." A murmur spread through the crowd, some shocked, others enraged. The head elder sneered, "Then you must prove your worth to us." "Human," he pointed to a heavy stone door at the back of the chamber. "Beyond lies the trial of worth." Cain nodded slowly, understanding. The weight of the challenge, the elder continued. "Retrieve the crimson fang from the wild predator that roams the eastern forest. Return before the dawn, or forfeit your right to stand here." Leora's eyes widened in fear. The eastern forest was dangerous, filled with beasts that had taken many lives. Cain's jaw tightened, but he did not hesitate. "I accept," he said firmly. The room fell silent, the elders exchanging wary glances for the first time. Leora saw a flicker of respect in some eyes as Cain turned to leave. Leora called out, her voice trembling, "Be careful." He looked back with a small smile. "For you," he said, "I will face anything." Outside, the air was thick with tension. Leora felt the weight of the colony's judgment pressing down on her, but somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope had been lit. The trial would decide more than Cain's fatigue would decide if she could change the world around her. The night. Sky was heavy with stars as Cain stepped into the eastern forest. The trees towered like giants, their branches twisting and hiding secrets. The air was thick with the smell of earth and damp leaves. Every step he took was cautious, his eyes sharp in the dark. He carried only a small blade and his determination. The forest was alive with soft rustling, distant howls, and the snap of twigs beneath unseen feet. Cain's breath came steady, but his heart beat faster with every shadow that moved. He knew the predator was close. The crimson fang he needed was said to come from a beast that hunted with silent claws and burning eyes. Many had tried to face it before and never returned. Hours passed like this, the cold seeping into Cain's bones. His muscles ached, but he pushed on. Suddenly, a low growl rolled through the trees. Cain froze, listening, his hand tightening on his blade. The predator stepped into a clearing. Its fur dark and matted, eyes glowing like hot embers. It was larger than any creature Cain had ever seen, muscles rippling beneath its skin, teeth sharp and glistening. Without hesitation, Cain moved forward, careful and slow. The beast snarled, lunging with terrifying speed. Cain dodged, feeling the rush of air as claws sliced past him. He slashed his blade across the creature's side, drawing blood. The fight was brutal and raw. Every move a test of skill and will. Cain took a heavy hit to his shoulder, pain flaring, but he refused to fall. Finally, with one swift motion, he grabbed the beast's jaw and forced it open. His fingers closed around the crimson fang, cold and sharp. The predator let out a final roar before collapsing. Cain stood, bloodied and breathless. Clutching the prize, the journey back was slower, each step heavier with exhaustion. At dawn, Cain emerged from the forest's edge. A crowd had gathered, whispers rising as he appeared. Leora's eyes searched for him among the faces. When she saw Cain, battered but alive, holding the fang, a silence fell over the colony. They had expected failure, death, or dishonor, but Cain had returned, and with proof of his courage, Leora stepped forward, her voice steady. He faced the impossible. For me, the elders could say nothing. The weight of his trial settling in the air like a storm. For the first time, the colony saw that strength was not in blood or tradition alone, but in courage, kindness, and the will to stand for another. The council chamber was filled with a heavy silence as Cain stood before the elders. The crimson fang gleamed faintly in his hand, proof of the trial he had survived. Eyes once filled with doubt now measured him with something near respect mixed with unease. The head elder's gaze was sharp, but he said nothing at first. The room waited, breath held, for his judgment. Finally, the elder spoke, his voice cold, but carrying weight. By surviving the trial of worth, you have proven your courage. Human, he paused, looking at Leora, and by standing beside you, he has challenged the old ways. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some voices full of anger, others curious. For years, tradition had been absolute, unchallenged, but now something had shifted. The elder raised his hand, calling for order according to our laws. Cain may claim Leora as his partner if she consents. All eyes turned to Leora. She felt the weight of their stares, the years of doubt and pain pressing down on her. But when she looked at Cain, she saw nothing but kindness and strength. Her voice was steady as she spoke. Yes, I choose him. A hush fell over the chamber. Some elders lowered their heads in quiet acceptance. Others clenched fists in silent protest. But the change had begun, and it could not be undone. Outside, whispers spread through the colony like wildfire. For the first time, those once labeled defective lifted their heads with hope. Leora knew her life was no longer defined by the cruel words of others. Cain reached out, taking her hand gently. Together, they stepped forward. A symbol of a new future, one where kindness could break old chains and courage could rewrite ancient laws. As they left the chamber, the sun broke through the clouds, a warm light spilling over the colony. It was the dawn of a new day for Leora, for Cain, and for all who dared to dream beyond tradition.